Hello, Land Talker subscribers. Welcome to another show of Land Talker TV. This is Jim Rothermich. I'm a land appraiser with Iowa Appraisal, and I'm also part of Land Hero. I live here in West Des Moines, Iowa, and I appraise farms all over the state of Iowa and get down a little bit into Missouri and maybe some surrounding states. But my major area of focus is the state of Iowa, and I keep track of all the auctions in Iowa, and I report those on social media. And I have a newsletter that goes out once a month. And if you would like to subscribe to that, it's a free subscription. Go to www.iowaappraisal.com. I also am a part of Land Hero, and Land Hero is a subscription-based sale database that will allow you to access my sales. And one thing I've noticed here lately is the amount of sealed bid auctions that are occurring here in Iowa. There is a large amount of them going on right now. And if you're needing access to high quality sale comps in a hurry, go to www.landhero.us and we can work with you on, say, like maybe you need one county or three counties or crop district. It's a la carte. You can buy what you need for a week or a month. But we'll work with you and you get most current sale database. And then if a sealed bid auction is there that you want to bid on, you'll have accurate sale data. All right. Well, on today's show, I am just tickled to death with who we got today as our guests. It's Austin Kessler and Justin Bahr. Justin, hold up your hand. And Austin, hold up your hand. There we go. And so I am excited about having these two guys on the show today. They are with Summit Agricultural Group, and they go to a lot of land auctions and are very active in farm management and land sales. And Summit does a whole bunch of other stuff, and I'll let them talk about that. But first, Austin, let's start with you. Can you kind of tell us about yourself? Tell us about where you went to school and your family and where you're from. Just go from there.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having us today, Jim. Just quick background on myself. Grew up in Eastern Iowa over by Durant, went to school there. Followed through, went to Iowa State, did ag business, agronomy. Met my wife there. We moved up here to Iowa Falls to join the Summit team and been going on 9 years. And yeah, 9 years and three kids later, here we are just working away.
Yeah, yep, yep. And your wife sells seed, right?
Yep, she sells DeKalb, so she's got me a mug and everything.
Is that right? She's a decal. Okay, good deal.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
And Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's good to be with you too, Jim. Justin Bahr. I'm actually from the area where Summit's based locally around Alden, Iowa Falls, Iowa. I went to Iowa State as well, and I was an agricultural business and international agriculture major there at Iowa State. So I've been in the farm management business coming up on 10 years here next year. The last 4 years I've been here at Summit and primarily focused in Iowa, Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, and eastern Nebraska. And my wife and I, Abby, live in Iowa Falls.
And how many kids do you have?
We do not have any kids yet.
Don't have
so
any. Okay.
no.
Okay. All right. That's okay. That's okay. Well, good deal. Good deal. Well, talk about Summit Agriculture Group. I'll just let one of you, whoever wants to jump in, kind of tell us, where you all located at and what all your businesses you have and what part of that are you guys involved in.
Great. Yep. So like I said earlier, Summit Agriculture Group is based out of Alden, Iowa. Our office is actually located on a farm just west of town, several miles. Several of us office out of the building. Like you say, there's different business units at Summit. It's a large scale farming operation and livestock producing farm here in north central Hardin County. Livestock would be cattle and hogs. Austin and I work in the land investment team and farm management team at Summit. So that would fall under the office here. And then we also have different groups that work in the renewable energy space and sustainable agricultural space as well. All those also based out of the office here at Summit and in Alden.
Yep, yep. No, good deal. Good deal. And I know you guys go to a lot at land auctions, and so Can you guys kind of talk about the market conditions you're seeing here in Iowa? And you also, go around to some of these fringe states. Can you kind of talk about those states too and what you're seeing and, how's Iowa maybe a little bit different than their market?
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. So I guess just the basis of where we typically like to invest is Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. Those are our three called primary states. We try to track every single auction in those three states. If it's investment grade farmland, which we consider about 75–80% tillable or above, and in your upper end threshold for PI or CSR ratings. For example, in Iowa, we call it 70 CSR and above, is where we typically like to be. Yeah, like I said, we hit every auction, we chase every listing. Even if we can't buy it for an investor, we're still watching it just to understand the market, track the comparable sale, and better understand this market as we go. So when you're talking about where this market's at today, I mean, it's down slightly. I think our numbers showed, just a quick stat on it was, we had a decrease from Q4 to Q1 of about 2.5%. Year over year, we're down about 5% on our numbers. We kind of see it expecting to stay flat here through Q2, Q3, just given the fact that you have super low supply out there right now. While farmers may be backing off buying, you just don't have enough supply to where coming off 3 years of a great cash returns on this crop, there's still enough people out there with money. They're keeping it kind of held stable in that market. So we don't see any big changes until you get a big supply flush coming through, like maybe late fall.
Yeah, well, I talked to a lot of auctioneers and realtors in a day, and they're telling me they're getting a good volume of calls for land auctions this fall. I hope that comes to fruition. And like I said, it is very low inventory right now. So it's hard to test the market when there's just so few auctions going on.
Yeah, we're hearing the same thing here. We think there's a lot of sales coming up in the, early fall, we'll call it. There's a lot coming up starting in more August. You kind of get a light June push, kind of dies off for the midsummer months of July there. You get into the fairs and auction market kind of dies off. But then come late August, we'll start seeing those sales
Yep.
pop up the way it
Yep.
looks. And yeah, that's when we start, hitting the tracks and hitting the road and going to look at more farms. I mean, we're always wanting to see what's available and chase down this market. So yeah.
Yeah, and Joel and I on the farm angel side, we work with just over 200 farmers throughout the Midwest, so that Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and you hear some chatter from our farmers that we work with as well, just locally seeing farms some maybe coming up for sale or landowners that they work with that are making some decisions and thinking about maybe what they'll do this fall as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just for a perspective too, Jim, you mentioned just to kind of cover scale too. Across those three states, we've tracked these comps for the last 15 years. Just to give some perspective there, it's on our numbers we just recently pulled, we've tracked about $23.5 billion worth of sales over that 15-year time period. Kind of in that's about 2.5 to 3 million acres roughly we've tracked, and we have a whole database. We keep them in and track them each year, and that kind of allows us to stay current in this market, just having that recollection in your system. And over that time, we've done quite a few transactions. It's somewhere north of $500 million in sales, between sales and acquisitions on both sides, because we do have investors buying, but then we also have the sales side when they decide to exit too.
Yep. No, that is amazing statistics because I know how hard it is to keep all that up, finding them and keeping it up. I do it by myself, and I've got some help, but I do a lot of it myself, and it's a lot of work. So that's great. And that, just keeping track of it every day and paying attention just teaches a lot, as where the market's going. Now, can you guys speak, why do you guys go to so many auctions? Kind of tell me, talk about who you're representing and what you're doing.
Yeah, so we we represent investors who want to partake in the market. There are many reasons why investors would want to use us as a medium to buy farm ground. One great example is just, if you're a small business owner in a community, but you like the farmland asset, you might not want to bid against your customers, So that's your typical type of thought. Otherwise, there's also just people who just don't want to do the work of knowing the comps in an area too. So when you have it to scale like we do with the comps and tracking everything, it makes it to where you can make efficient buys. So we've been buying for investors, like I mentioned, for about 15 years, and it just you kind of grow upon itself as in you just friends and family network. People talk about the good results they've had, and next thing you know, they're sending their relative or friend along to join up too. So yeah, just experience starts building on itself there, and just we've always believed the most accurate data leads to the best results. So we always strive very deeply in trying to get good results because that's going to help grow our business in general.
Right, right, right. And then so if an investor buys a farm, does he have Justin, do you guys farm manage that farm, or do they have somebody else manage it, or how does that? Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, sort of that lease back strategy falls pretty commonly at our team. A landowner, typically it's a non-operating landowner that's looking to invest in the farm, but they would need a farmer to partner with. And we were going to talk later here about different structures of how those have been, but that's the goal, is to try to help a farmer locate an investor to work with so that they can continue to add acres to their operation or just maintain the acres in their operation. So Joel and I help oversee that process once the farms close, to make sure that the records are kept accurately and communications continues with our tenants. So we can have a great relationship with them and know what's going on the farm. Getting by them pretty regularly throughout the year to keep an eye on crop conditions and so forth.
Yep. Yep. And you mentioned sell leasebacks. Let's talk about that. I know, we haven't really heard a lot about sale leasebacks because the market was so hot and, farmers were making a lot of money, but now they're starting to come into play. And talk about what a sale leaseback is, and just do that. Just talk about what a sale leaseback is and why somebody would want to do that.
Yeah, I think when you're talking generic sale leaseback, there's three different styles of leasebacks. The one that comes to most people's mind is like a stress sale leaseback. In financial trouble, need to liquidate an asset. Farmland's a high liquidity or a low liquidity asset to where sometimes it's more difficult. You're better off selling to your neighbor sometimes. So what we've seen in the past is some guys just don't want to lose those acres in their footprint that they're covering. So finding an investor to buy it quietly and privately and keep it, in their system when they're struggling is one way. There's a lot of growth sale leasebacks we see. That's another model. That's where, hey, Farmer John wants to buy the auction that's coming up tomorrow next door. He's got some outlier land that is 6-7 miles away, but this one's right across the road. We got to own this one, But he says, why sell that outlier farm to the neighbor? Why not try to stay on it as well? So we'll have people reach out saying, I want to stay on this farm, but I'd rather own the one across from my house for sure. We have those type of leasebacks. And then just your typical, I call it the exit plan leasebacks, I guess you'd call it, where it's, hey, I got a couple hundred acres my landlord wants to sell. I've been farming this for 30 years. I don't want to lose acreage. It's kind of a preservation leaseback. In that scenario, it's just you're trying to hold on to what you have currently that you're farming, but yet you don't want to have to shell out the cash maybe for the whole thing. If it's some of these landowners own 200, 400, 500 acres, 1,000 acres, and it's just too heavy of an asset to take that all down yourself. So what a lot of these guys will do is they'll say, example, they'll take a 240 that their landlord's selling and they'll say, hey, I want to buy the 80 or the 160, but I don't want to lose the last 80, So they'll look for an investor to bite off the last chunk so they can do the deal, because typically what happens if you can't buy it all and it's your landlord's, lots of times they'll say, well, we'll just take it to auction then because we want it to be all one transaction. So we see that very often where I can't swing everything my landlord has, but I don't want to lose any of those acres. So can you help me take a portion of this farm?
And a lot of those conversations are done privately, so there's some negotiation between both parties. And in our case, we see farm improvements kind of get discussed at the early stages or maybe even before the transaction happens. So you have an idea of what the farm might need. Maybe it's the perimeter needs to be cleaned up, or a waterway or terrace project needs to be complete to be reshaped or repaired. And then drainage improvements are pretty common in our area too, just to maximize the farm. And then the lease itself will have different terms based off of what the party's goals and objectives are. The rental rate, and then potentially a flex rate will be built into that too, based on based on the structure of that agreement. But when it's done privately, that kind of allows both parties to, I don't know, put it all out there and kind of
Yeah.
negotiate.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between kind of going to the, like if the farm would go to auction and you just get lucky and get a stay on the farm versus if you're proactive about it as the farmer, you maybe can find that investor where it can all be negotiated up front. And having a group like ourselves, we're extremely flexible. There are guys who will lease it back who buy farms themselves, but you're not always guaranteed to get kind of the terms that work for you as the tenant, which may lead to you exiting the farm too. So we like to keep guys on the farm and work with them to find solutions to help get their landlord the money they need to get out of the property while also being able to stay on with terms that work for them. So that's been our biggest niche is we can provide a ton of flexibility, whether it's when it gets closed, how the lease is structured. Like Justin said, if the farm needs heavy improvements, the previous landlord didn't want to put the money into the property. That's something we can say, hey, if we're going to leave the farm as is, here's where the rental range should be in the price. But if you want us to clean it up and spend this capital, we can adjust where metrics need to be. So when it's off market and private, you're allowed a lot more flexibility, I guess, versus at a public auction, the sale happens, we got to move forward, guys. So you lose that flexibility in that structure usually.
Right, right, right. Well, I'll say one thing. I know this for a fact is you guys like Thailand farms. I know that because I've
Absolutely.
appraised some of those and that you all have bought and there's tile going in there pretty quick if it needs
Yeah.
it, if it needs it, if it
A
needs
good
it.
friend of ours used to say, Ryan Rotman, he used to say, well, you're paying for tile, whether you're putting it in or not, one way or another, you're paying for it. So we tend to lean towards that judgment as well.
Well, that's something I notice when I have to do work for you guys. Those farms are all well drained. Most of the time, they're all well drained, and it's those wet spots are fixed or whatever it needs. It's getting done or it has gotten done. Um, so can you go through like in general terms, like an example of each one that you just described? I mean, and just kind of talk about that is say like, and I want to talk about, if a farmer says, hey, I'm kind of in trouble right now. I need to sell this farm. I want to keep it, but I don't, but then I want to buy it back. Is that an option or can you speak to that some?
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to that flexibility side. Most times when guys are in that stress situation, they know they have to liquidate the farm. They don't want to liquidate it. It's not a fun experience, but they need optionality and usually it's something close to home and they don't want to lose it forever. And they know if it goes to a public sale, it's going to be neighbor will buy it, it'll be gone. So that's where we do offer buyback terms, and that's part of that flexibility. It's very common. Anyone who brings us a private deal, we offer them a buyback option. If we go buy it on a public auction, we don't necessarily offer that just because it was allowed to go to market. But if someone's willing to call us and work privately, we always offer that option. I was just looking at the numbers earlier. I think overall we've done 60 to 70 million dollars worth of private sale leaseback transactions, and we've only sold a few of those properties so far, but of the ones we've sold, about 75% of the tenants have been able to stay on the farm, which I think is a pretty good number, and it doesn't mean they've necessarily activated the buyback themselves. We've had a couple guys have their sons buy it, have a cousin buy it back, or they've found their own private investor, or we happen to have an investor call to buy it to where we can keep them on the farm and keep them, that way they can stay on those acres and not have to get kicked off. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what would be a typical term? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we are working for investors who want to make a little money. So typically we shoot for 10-year holds just on those type of deals. That's
Uh-huh.
the ideal term. Obviously, if the market gets hot in year 8, well, and our investors say, well, I want to take some chips off the table and sell a farm or two. It does happen where we turn them earlier, but we shoot for 10 years. That's always the goal. But just because investors do want liquidity, they don't want to hold it forever always. So that's maybe a difference too, just there was most of our investors are looking for some liquidity where some of your private guys, think of banker lawyers in the local town. Some of those guys might want to hold the ground forever, 30 years, pass to their kids for another 30 years, where most of our investors are more active business thinkers thinking, I want to be in the land space, but I want to have flexibility to move around potentially.
Yep. Yep, yep. And so can you speak to an example on each one of those that you had described in general terms?
Yeah, I could share, like, we had a farm in Minnesota. Farmer was farming north half of a section and owned one of the quarters, but was leasing the other quarter from a landowner. And that owner decided to, I think they maybe discussed potentially buying it, but they ended up going to auction with that farm. Well, that fit really well in that specific farmer's operation. And so would hate to lose those acres. So we worked outside of that privately with that farmer to buy one of his 80-acre parcels that he owned. I wouldn't necessarily call it an outlier in his operation, but it didn't tie in as well as this other property
Right.
did. So we worked with him to buy that 80, and then he took the net proceeds from that when he was a successful bidder at that auction for that quarter. And he was able to hang on to all the acres he had, switch the acres he owned into acres that were more fit for his operation. And then we worked on a multiple year lease on that 80 acres that we have with him, and put some tile into it too. And he was familiar enough with the farm to know kind of where the spots were that it needed some help, and worked out well. So if that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like a win-win on for both parties on that. Um, what about say like uh if a bank calls you and say, "Hey, or maybe not a bank, but a farmer says, "Hey,
Yeah.
I've got somebody in trouble here. Can you help them out?" Does that happens, right?
That happens, absolutely. So that's actually how we got into this more sale-leaseback business, actually, is when you kind of went through 2016 through 19, we saw some of that stress come through
Right,
in certain pockets of the
right.
world. And that's when we really dove into this venture on the leasebacks. And most of those early ones were stress related. And I mean, the farmers got very limited options once the bank starts making calls and doing the knocking. It's auction or try to preserve acres with an investor. And yeah, those usually work out well to worst case scenario you look at it is hopefully you get us down that farm 8 to 10 years, even if when it comes back to the buyback time, even if you can't buy it back, at least you got to farm it 10 more years and try to get back to where you want to be type of deal. But we've done many of those in 16 through 19, but anymore, it's shifted more towards, like Justin said, those I call them preservation or growth models, where it's I want to buy it, sell an outlier to buy the farm I've always wanted to buy for 30 years. Because like they said, when farms sell, you got to buy them when they come up because they usually only come up once. So that mindset to expand acres and get them into larger chunks, turning quarters into 320s, that really is becoming apparent as with equipment getting larger. Guys are wanting to do that more often. So they're willing to sell an outlier just to make that happen.
You speak about you might only get one chance to buy a farm. You guys do know when the best time is to buy a farm, don't you?
When it's for sale.
It's when it's for sale. That's right.
We hear that one at
That's
every
right.
auction in the back of the room. Every auction we hear
It's
that.
when it's for sale. That's the best time. Some people ask me that question. I think they want me to say it's in the fall of the year, the spring of the year, summer, whatever. I say it's when it's for sale is the best time to buy that farm.
Yeah, any more of these auctions you hear every other auction is this is a heritage farm or a family farm that's been in the family 80, 100 years. So it's a pretty true statement anymore once you see these farms turning.
Yeah, when that market got hot, when we was up towards the peak or heading up towards the peak, it was jarring some of those farms loose. Had been in hands of families 100 years or better, and that's sometimes that's what it takes is those big prices to get those farms to come to the market. So sure. Um, as far as do you have an example? Let's see. Any other examples you'd be willing to share on a sale leaseback that you did? Is there like maybe an area where where some of those calls are coming in because they had a bad crop year or something like that? Is there something like that going on in the market or?
Yeah, you see those regional pinpoints, I guess you'd call it. So like last year when you had all those rains up near Okoboji up in that area, you saw a little stress. If a guy was struggling to tick and then all of a sudden he gets a crop just demolished. You'll get a couple calls regionally. It's just not frantic like the whole neighborhood selling, but
Right.
I mean many of those guys, we see it more often. It's not selling like a whole farm, right? So it's like if a guy farms 1,000 acres, sometimes he just needs a little cash liquidity infusion. So it's like, hey, just sell a quick 40, just to get a little working capital there. That's usually all the banks need is just some working capital to kind of work out the kinks on the rest of the note. So Yeah, we just really don't see as much stress anymore. Not saying there's not more been coming recently here, but in the last 3 years, for example, we've done very little stress
Right.
related sales.
Right. But it's maybe starting to pick up a little bit right now, maybe. Is
It's
that,
starting to.
yeah.
We had a good winter of sale leasebacks, not all stress, but we've been hearing rumblings it is going to pick up.
Um,
Some of those payments that farmers are getting, the government ones, $40 an acre for corn
yeah.
beans probably helps out with those operating loans too. So it's hard to know if that would have made a difference or not. And then you got a lot of stress, younger farmers too that are getting started. Maybe right after those run up years, 21 and 2. That's got to be tough to get started too with prices where they are and input costs staying pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, as far as on the appraisal side, I'm getting more requests than I have in a long time from those high risk lenders right now. And so for appraisals. So there
Mhm.
is a little bit of stress out there. It's just not all good things. And there is strong balance sheets out there, but there is some stress. There's no doubt about that. So, can you kind of go through the process from, when somebody calls you until the end? Can you kind of walk
Yeah.
us through that?
Yeah, so typically it's just asking the right questions up front. What are kind of your goals? That's the main question to start with. You just feel out the situation, but then once it gets to the process of running numbers, I guess, or the nuts and bolts of it, first thing is to go try to look at the farm, get a feel for it, see it in person. We always say just check to make sure that it's not a problem farm, make sure it looks okay, lays all right, understand it better. So when you're valuing improvements like tile or tree removal, you understand how big are those trees? How big is that wet area maybe? So first things, look at the farm, start running a basic cash flow. And then the big thing is just figuring in improvements is next. If there's tree removal or tile, kind of give good estimates to know what that would cost. That's sometimes hard to do regionally. Tile estimates in southern, eastern Illinois may vary quite a bit from what you could get in central Iowa or northern Minnesota. So just understanding those markets by working with Justin and Joel is a huge factor too of, hey, what was your last tile project bid at in this region of the world? So getting good basis for improvement projects so your total all-in money you'll need to do this transaction. And then just working through the details on what is the goal? Is the goal to buy this farm back? Is the goal to help with cash flow? We've done deals where potentially you take a year or two's rent off the purchase price to avoid taxes, just because we are at inflated price or high prices, in general. So if you could take a couple $100,000 off a sale price to avoid capital gains, we've done structures like that. So figuring out what their goal is important as the seller, but then also just how can we help make sure this process goes smoothly for you so you are able to buy this back? Once we run numbers, it's pretty apparent kind of a range of where we'll be. We run numbers on farms to go buy at auction, so we're just tracking auction comps, where's the market, understand where it's at, pull your comps for the farm, know where you're at, let the guy know this is the range we're in today based upon what sales are doing. For a cash flow constraint, for us to, operate this farm and keep it viable for our investors, this is the kind of rental range we need to be. And then you just kind of finesse from there. If they think the cash rent's too high at that price point, it's like, well, we can always adjust, move price points down or up or whatever way you need to do it. Structuring the lease, the buyback side, that's just simple. Here are the terms we provide. Do these work for you? There's many different ways you can do buybacks. We've heard of different ones like doing off 2 or 3 appraisals and doing an average. We have our own set internal model, but we see all sorts of different ideas thrown at us from farmers of what fits best for them or what they'd ideally like. And like I said, it's all negotiation. We're flexible. As long as it fits in our cash flows and our price points where the market's at, we're good to work around any obstacle there is.
Yeah, it sounds like it's one size doesn't fit all. You adjust to the situation is what it sounds like. So it probably starts with a phone call and then you go out and meet with that person that called you that owns the land and you probably share the costs, what you estimate the costs at whatever needs to be done and do I got that right?
Yeah, no, typically we always put it on whoever owns the farm. So if it's say trees need removed on that property, it's
Uh-huh.
well, if you want to remove them before we buy them at your cost, we would change our price points based on that. But if you want us to remove them, we would foot that cost, but we're penciling into our model. And it's just making sure you understand, like Justin said earlier, just making sure everyone's on the same page. You know, you don't want to get to a point where the farmer thinks I'm going to remove the trees at my cost, but I think he's going to remove them at his cost. You know, you don't want to get in those disagreements because that makes for an unhappy transaction in the end. So our biggest priority is to get everything out on the table. What is the goals? What are your plans? What are your thoughts? Here's how we can help. Here's kind of what we offer, and then just kind of negotiate and adjust from there to make sure it works for everyone, and to make sure, as we like to say, everything up front so there's no surprises, because typically surprises are not good and they usually lead to disgruntled transactions, and that's no fun for anyone.
What's the highest tiling project you've ever seen? I know some of them get up there $1,300 an acre. Is that, have you heard anything higher than that or not?
That's probably the highest I've heard too.
Be up there.
Yeah, it seems like ever since, prior to COVID, they've gone up significantly. They've tapered down some in the last couple of years, but then you had prices improved for crops. So I suppose supply and demand made tile projects more expensive that way too. But yeah, in that $800 to $1,200 an acre range, just depending on where you're at and how many contractors are available and how things are in that market, seems to
Yeah.
catch a lot of the costs.
Yeah,
Same
it's
with-
Yeah.
Yeah, tree removal is another one we do tend to do quite a bit on, especially over in Illinois. And that used to be a $2,000 to $4,000 an acre project. And that's one that's climbed quite a bit. We see in Illinois from 4,000 to 8,000 to remove trees sometimes. So it's quite significant when you have, 10 acres of trees that need removed off a perimeter or something.
Yeah.
That's interesting. They don't have those trees removed over there. That state's been there longer than Iowa has.
It seems like when you get closer to Chicago, it just you have more unattached heirs that just acquired the farm from grandpa, had never seen it, never looked at it, never spent time on the trees, and the tenants maybe didn't think it was their job to do it. So you do find that quite often up near Chicagoland. Just someone owned that farm and took a cash rent every year, but never knew what it looked like and knew it needed cleaned up. So that's one of our bread and butters over there, is just to do a little cleanup facelift to the farm to help give it a little better road appeal.
Sure, and you guys probably remove any old corn cribs or old government
Yeah.
bins and
Yeah.
and
And I was going to say, Colin and Austin spent a lot of time, on your due diligence looking at historical aerials too.
Absolutely.
Just because, he made a good scenario there. Like if you've got families that are kind of disconnected from their farm, maybe you've never seen it, they don't always have a lot of records on that farm when you're going through that purchasing process. So those Google Earth or Acres, there's tons of platforms out there that you use to see if there was a building site here at one point, or maybe even see tile in a certain area of the farm that was installed 20 years ago that pops up. So
It's huge
helps
help.
fill in those gaps.
Absolutely.
talk about those landlords that haven't paid attention to their farm ground. I heard from a realtor not too long ago that they're selling a farm. They sold a farm, and that the person that owned it died, and the people that inherited it didn't realize they inherited it, and it was in CRP, and the FSA office didn't know who to mail the CRP check to. And it sat there for 2 years, and nobody knew what was going on. And then the 2 years expired, and then the people that inherited figured out, what, we got to do something, and they sold it. So those heirs, sometimes they just kind of push that, unseen, and out of mind, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. That certainly happens. We have some clients that we manage for outside of our, for our land investors of different kinds. And we always encourage them to have those conversations with your family, even if they don't maybe have that interest, because that's a costly mistake potentially. If that CRP got out of compliance in your example, and you have to go in there and do a bunch of work to get it back in place, the payments may not offset the cost it takes to do it. So now they've got more of a headache to deal with on their hands than that asset and legacy that their family maybe intended to leave them. But that's a pretty unique instance. Easements are common too. There's in Minnesota, there's a Reinvest in Minnesota program, and a lot of CRP ends up automatically enrolling into that. And that may have been signed up by one owner, and then that knowledge doesn't get passed on to the next. And yeah, you've got different situations out there for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, that surprised me when I heard that story, but I knew it was true. Now, Justin, talk about, do you do cash rents, or do you do base rent and flex leases? Can you kind of walk us through that, and, kind of where you're at with that?
The overwhelming majority are cash-based leases, so cash rent. And the majority of those also include some sort of a provision that provides a bonus payment. If in our, there's a lot of ways to structure those. Ours is revenue-based, just off of yield and price. So you use some sort of price discovery period that the operator and the owner agree on. And then the yield on that farm, some people, probably less commonly, but there's APH history on that farm. There's just different parameters that you'd have to agree to. And then discovering a percentage of that revenue is what we use to determine what the actual rent would be. So if your percent of revenue ends up being higher than your base, the difference of that would be the bonus payment that would be due. And yeah, lots of the reasons for people to do that. Some have felt that you can make your rent potentially more relaxed, which is helpful for the farmer, and then the owner, if it's a good year, will get a big bonus payment to make up for that. So it's able to manage risk a little bit easier for both parties. Another reason, maybe you can have a 2-year lease or 3-year lease versus a 1-year. The landowner won't feel like they are going to miss the market if it rises, if they have a flex lease in place. So they maybe feel more comfortable signing a little longer term lease, and the farmer that would be willing to do that too. You're probably seeing a decline in participating leases with crop share and custom farming overall in the state. Although there are people that enjoy being involved in the decision making on their farm. They want to make sure that it's being fertilized to the level they want it to be, or it's building fertility. And so the only way you can probably truly control that is if you're responsible for paying for that. So some owners enjoy being on those lease types to be more involved with their farm. And there's advantages tax wise too to have some of the ability to maneuver your income expenses, but from year to year too. But
I think you're seeing a lot of that. 20 years ago, you had more 50-50 or crop share type leases, and I think people have been moving away from that. And it's kind of following the pattern of you've had more and more people exiting the farm world, I feel like, Jim. I mean, as people move to cities and the same unattached heir doesn't even know they own a farm, I think that's the difference in why people are moving away from it. Some of these heirs are just thinking it's a headache. I just want my check. And that's why it's going to that cash rent style where, 20 years ago, I think you had more involved parents and kids were more closer to the farm to where they wanted to stay involved, and it seems like more and more every day the world's becoming more urbanized, and that away goes the want or need to want to control the farm, and they just say, I want my check and that's it. I want to sit on my boat.
Yeah. 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 Well, I'm amazed. I tell you what, I've heard some cash rent horror stories, or maybe even crop share horror stories just from people doing Google searches and they could be on either coast, East or West Coast. And they call me up and they start telling me what they're getting for their rent. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And they might say, well, Dad negotiated that rent and he's been gone 10 years and we haven't changed it. And even in those good years, I had people call me and say, well, the farmer said he was losing money. It's like, there's no way he could have lost money the past, that time frame after COVID,
Yeah.
So so there, you guys do serve landowners. You do provide them a good service because they just don't have the data to negotiate those rents or even sale prices, and you guys for sure do have that. So you're doing a big favor for them, and I appreciate that. So. Anything? Well, I tell you what, we need to be wrapping this up, but just kind of see how do you guys think farming is going to look like in 10, 20 years? Can you, each one of you kind of tell me what you're thinking, what your vision of the future is going to look like?
Yeah, I think it's a different world, but I think you're going to have, my opinion, less middle-sized farmers. I think you're going to have smaller farmers that have the day job still. I think that's the common theme is guys who want to farm but just can't make it pencil to afford to feed the family. So they're going to have a day job and they're going to moonlight the farming and, on that 1,000 acres or less, I think you'll still have those guys forever just because the passion's there. And then I think as those middle-sized farmers, I think they're starting to struggle with, providing for a family off just farming. So I think it's those guys will push to continue to get bigger and bigger, and you'll just have those large farmers and the small farmers. And I think the middle guys will pick which way they tend to go. So that's my opinion. I don't know if I like it necessarily, but I wish a middle-sized farmer could, stay on and feed a family. But the reality is things are getting tighter, and I don't see it being a future, my opinion, but
Yeah.
it's a little pessimistic. But
Yeah, it's hard. We're kind of still in a lull, I guess. Prices, so everyone's sort of just cautiously optimistic, maybe is a better way to say it. But yeah, hopefully we see, renewable fuels continue and
yeah,
potentially sustainable aviation fuel become a potential marketplace, which will be good for agriculture, especially when you have the rest of the world like Brazil and Argentina, South America producing more and exports kind of tending to shift that direction less than the US. So yeah, there's a lot going on. So I'm going to just pass on answering that question.
Well, it's now Austin, when you talk about a small farm, to give me the size what you consider a small farm.
uh, I mean, you see a lot of those guys who can still farm up to 1,000, 1,500 acres moonlighting, or I see a lot of it where it's dad's still farming, but he's slowing down, so the son's helping too. So they're both farming, but dad's half retired, son's half working at the full-time job. I see that is becoming very common. So you can still be a decent sized operation, but it just seems like things are always tight. And like Justin said, we need the opportunities of the future with sustainable aviation fuel coming through and helping make these prices better so we can keep every farmer there is.
Yeah. Well, I was at the World Pork Expo yesterday and listening to uh, their economists talk about corn prices, and boy, there's no good news coming with that. So we definitely got to get some new markets to get that demand higher than what it is, because right now it's, corn prices just aren't looking fantastic.
Yeah, we're pretty
So
good at raising corn. We just need to get better at getting rid of it and
that's
find those new
right.
markets.
Finding new
Yeah.
markets, that's the key. So, well, if somebody wants to get a hold of you guys, tell me how they do that.
Yeah, you can find us at our website, summitag.com. There's a land fund page where you can find me and Justin's contact information. Our phone, emails are right there. Call or email anytime. We're happy to talk to anyone about any situation. And yeah, it's always confidential and happy to help out any way we can.
Anything else you guys want to share before we go?
No, this is
Covered a
great.
good
It
amount,
went
yeah.
super fast, Jim, but we appreciate you having us on for sure.
Yeah. So if you're somebody that's a landowner that's wanting to do a sale lease back, these two guys definitely give them a call because they will help you out. And they are just always, I work with them and we have a very good working relationship, and they're just always just really good to work with, and they don't, wish-washy around. They just tell you the facts, whether you want to hear it or not. They're just going to tell you the facts. So I appreciate that. So, all right. Well, thank you guys, and good luck. I think we got a good prospect for crops so far. Don't you guys would agree with that, don't you?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's looking good.
Really nice start there in April and just record planting pace for some guys and certain areas. So, and then nice rain here this week in middle of May. So yeah, crops looking good.
Yep, yep. So we'll probably hit that average 181 bushels an acre nationwide. Probably that's good and bad. It's going to be good for the producer, but as far as corn prices, it's not going to be good. So, all right. Well, let's sign off. Thank you guys for being on today's show, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.